My boss told me to be a man and work through grief, so I took my leave, filed a complaint, and he lost his promotion weeks later. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and the day my world fell apart started like any other. The low hum of office chatter, the smell of burnt coffee, and a screen full of numbers I barely cared about. Then my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her voice was broken, trembling, like the air itself had shattered. She said the words I'll never forget. "Your father's gone." For a moment, everything went silent. The clacking of keyboards, the air conditioner's buzz, all of it faded. My hands went cold, my breath caught in my throat. I remember just staring at my monitor, watching the cursor blink like it was mocking me for sitting still while my entire world collapsed. I stood up and walked straight to my boss's office. My voice was shaking as I said, "Sir, I just got a call. My dad passed away. I need to take a few days off." He didn't even look up right away. Just kept typing, like my words were background noise. Then, with this annoyed sigh, he finally said, "We're in the middle of a critical project. You'll have to figure out how to handle this like a man." I thought I'd misheard him, but no. He looked straight at me, eyes cold as if grief was some weakness he didn't have time for. I wanted to yell, to tell him what kind of man I was losing. Instead, I just nodded and walked out before my voice broke. The elevator ride down felt endless. My reflection in the metal doors looked like a stranger. Pale, hollow, detached. In that moment, I realized something painful. In this place, my father's death didn't matter. My grief didn't matter. To my boss, I was just another machine expected to keep running. The next morning, I showed up to work even though every bone in my body begged me not to. My father's jacket was still hanging by the door at home, his coffee mug still half full. And yet, here I was, pretending to care about quarterly reports. My mother's voice echoed in my head from the night before. "You don't have to go in, sweetheart." But I'd already heard my boss's words on repeat. "Handle it like a man." When I walked into the office, people knew. You can always tell when someone's carrying grief. It hangs in the air around them. A few coworkers gave me those sympathetic glances, the kind that say, "I'm sorry," without actually saying it. One even whispered, "I can't believe he still made you come in." But no one dared to confront my boss. Everyone knew better. By noon, I had 3 new assignments in my inbox, each marked urgent. Then came the message that made my stomach twist. "We all have problems, but deadlines don't wait. Need those reports today." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My eyes stung and I blinked hard, pretending it was just from staring too long. During meetings, I forced myself to keep a neutral face, even as my hands trembled under the table. Every time someone asked for an update, my voice cracked just a little more. When the meeting ended, I locked myself in a bathroom stall and finally let it out. Not a loud sob, just a quiet, suffocating release that felt like betrayal. I was betraying myself, betraying my father, by being here instead of home. That's when the truth hit me. If I left now, I'd be labeled unreliable. But if I stayed, I'd lose the last pieces of myself that still felt human. By the 3rd day, I was running on fumes, physically present but mentally miles away. Every spreadsheet, every email, every ping felt meaningless. My father's face kept flashing in my mind, followed by the sound of my mother crying on the phone every night. I'd been holding it all together with sheer willpower, but cracks were starting to show. That morning, we had another urgent meeting. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. I sat at the end of the table trying to focus as my boss droned on about accountability and professionalism. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing nonsense because my brain was too fogged with grief to care. Then, mid-sentence, my boss stopped talking and looked right at me. "You with us, or are you still on planet sadness?" he said, half smirking. A few people glanced at me, their eyes wide with discomfort. I felt my chest tighten, heat rushing up my neck. I tried to steady my voice. "I'm doing my best," I said quietly. He chuckled. Actually chuckled. "If this is your best, maybe you should take lessons on how to be a real man who can handle pressure." Something inside me snapped. I closed my laptop with a sharp thud, the sound slicing through the room. "You know what?" I said, my voice shaking but clear. "You're right. Maybe a real man knows when to walk away before he breaks." The silence that followed was deafening. My boss's smirk disappeared, replaced by shock. "Real men don't run from life," he muttered, but his words sounded hollow now. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out without another word. My hands were trembling, but for the first time in days, I felt something close to power. That afternoon, I filed for bereavement leave. Not as a request, but as a declaration. It was the first time I'd chosen me over his control. When I came back after the funeral, the office felt different. Colder, quieter, like the air itself had changed. People still said, "Good morning," but their eyes darted away too quickly, like they were afraid of catching whatever grief I carried. My desk, once piled high with important reports, now had a single post-it note from my boss. "Focus on data entry this week. Keep things simple while you readjust." It was a demotion wrapped in fake concern. For days, he barely looked at me. No greetings, no updates. Every time I tried to join a meeting, he'd say, "Don't worry about this one. We'll loop you in later." I never got looped in. Projects I had built from scratch were suddenly reassigned. The new guy he'd been mentoring, a kid straight out of college, was now leading them. I watched from the sidelines as my own work became someone else's success story. Then came the whispers. I overheard one coworker murmur near the break room, "I heard he had a breakdown. Couldn't handle the stress." Another said, "Yeah, the boss said he's still not stable." Each word was a stab to the chest, not loud enough to confront, but loud enough to destroy quietly. I tried talking to HR once, keeping it vague. "I think I'm being sidelined after returning from leave." The HR rep smiled sympathetically and said, "Sometimes managers just need to rebuild trust. Maybe give it time." Translation: we're not getting involved. That's when something shifted in me. I stopped waiting for fairness and started preparing for proof. I began saving emails, screenshots, and chat logs. Every dismissive comment, every task reassignment, every concerned message about my emotional state. He wanted me silent. Instead, I decided to become observant. A week later, I was eating lunch alone at my desk when Sarah, one of the few people who'd still talk to me, quietly pulled up a chair. She glanced around, lowering her voice. "You should know something," she said, her tone sharp but careful. "He's been talking about you to upper management, saying you're unreliable, that you're still emotionally volatile after your dad's death." I froze mid-bite, the plastic fork bending between my fingers. "He said that?" She nodded, her eyes filled with sympathy but edged with frustration. "He's trying to frame it like he's protecting the team from your instability. It's total manipulation. I've seen him do it before." My stomach dropped. "Before?" Sarah leaned closer. "Yeah, there was a guy named David a few years back. His wife had cancer, and when he took time off, the boss started whispering that he couldn't handle pressure. David filed a complaint, but he dropped it when HR couldn't find enough evidence. 2 months later, he quit. No one's heard from him since." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. It wasn't just me. This was a pattern, a cycle of targeting anyone who showed vulnerability, twisting empathy into weakness, and then burying them under lies. I wanted to storm into HR right then, slam the evidence on the table, and make them listen. But fear crept in like a shadow. What if they didn't believe me? What if he made sure I was the next unstable employee quietly replaced? Sarah touched my arm gently. "If you ever decide to report him," she whispered, "I've got your back. But be smart. He's not the type to go down without a fight." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing I was part of something much bigger and much darker than just a bad boss. The next few weeks became a quiet war. Every day, I showed up with a polite smile while my boss chipped away at me piece by piece. He started assigning impossible tasks, reports due overnight, presentations with zero prep time, data requests that required information I didn't even have access to. When I failed to meet his impossible standards, he'd sigh dramatically in front of the team. "You're still not yourself, huh?" he'd say, pretending to be sympathetic while smirking just enough for me to notice. But I stopped reacting. Instead, I started recording. Screenshots of every message. Notes from every meeting. I started keeping a small notebook in my bag, jotting down dates, times, and exact phrases he used. Unreliable. Emotional. Needs supervision. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was strategy. Still, the emotional weight was crushing. I barely slept. When I closed my eyes, I saw my dad's face. Calm, kind, the man who taught me that dignity mattered more than pride. But every morning, walking into that office, I felt like I was betraying him again by staying quiet. My reflection in the elevator glass looked worn, older, tired. I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. Sarah checked in on me every few days. "You holding up?" she'd ask. I'd lie and say yes, even though my hands trembled just holding a cup of coffee. Then, one afternoon, she slipped me a piece of information that made everything click. "You know he's up for a big promotion next quarter, right?" The words hit me like a thunderclap. Suddenly, it all made sense. The overcompensation, the fake professionalism, the need to silence any potential blemish on his record. He wasn't just being cruel, he was protecting his image. For the first time, I felt something sharper than fear. Purpose. Once Sarah told me about the promotion, everything started to make sense. Every fake smile, every calculated concern, every attempt to make me look unstable. My boss wasn't just managing me. He was protecting his image for the next rung up the corporate ladder. That realization flipped a switch inside me. For weeks I'd been reacting, trying to survive. But now I started planning. I spent nights going through every email, every message, cross-referencing timelines. The insults, the exclusion, the way he rewrote history to make me look weak, I documented it all. I created folders, labeled dates, and even noted the times Sarah and others witnessed things. My pain turned into focus. My fear turned into fuel. The next morning, I requested a private meeting with HR. I didn't go in angry. I went in calm, collected. The HR rep, the same one who'd brushed me off weeks ago, looked startled when I handed over a neatly organized folder. "This contains messages, meeting notes, and witness statements," I said evenly. "It shows a pattern of emotional harassment and retaliation after bereavement leave." Her face shifted from polite interest to discomfort. "We'll review this thoroughly," she said, and for the first time she sounded like she meant it. When I left her office, the fluorescent lights above me didn't feel so harsh anymore. The hallways, once suffocating, now felt like a battleground I was finally ready to fight on. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the last photo I had with my dad, his arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling. He'd always told me, strength isn't about silence. It's about standing tall when you're shaking. I smiled faintly, whispering to the empty room, "He wanted me to be a man? Fine. I'll show him what accountability looks like." Filing the formal complaint felt like jumping off a cliff. No turning back once I hit send. I attached every file, every screenshot, every note, and signed my name at the bottom. Within hours, HR replied with a polite but serious message. "We'd like to schedule an interview to discuss your concerns in detail." The meeting room smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and tension. I sat across from two HR reps, both with notepads and those carefully neutral faces that give nothing away. I laid out everything: the harassment, the rumors, the emotional manipulation. I even mentioned Sarah's confirmation that this wasn't his first time targeting someone in grief. Every word felt like I was bleeding in slow motion, but I refused to stutter or look away. They asked me questions. Calm, methodical, but sharp. "Do you believe these actions were intentional? Were there witnesses? Why didn't you report sooner?" Each one stung, but I answered honestly. When it was over, one of them nodded. "Thank you for coming forward. We'll be conducting an internal review immediately." The next day, they called my boss in. I didn't see him, but the whispers traveled fast. A coworker later told me he'd walked into the HR office smirking, as if he was too important to be questioned. Apparently, he told them I was still struggling emotionally and that my claims were misinterpretations from a place of grief. Classic deflection. But this time, HR wasn't brushing it aside. I noticed the difference. The subtle way people watched him when he passed. The cautious tone in meetings. Something had shifted. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. My stomach was in knots, my mind replaying every possibility. What if they didn't believe me? What if he twisted it again? But beneath the fear, there was a quiet flicker of something else. Freedom. For the first time, the truth wasn't trapped in my head anymore. It was on record. If I thought filing the complaint would end things, I was wrong. My boss didn't explode. He got smarter, colder, more deliberate. Within days, I started noticing small changes. Meetings I'd normally be invited to suddenly disappeared from my calendar. Project threads no longer included my email. I'd walk into the break room and conversations would stop mid-sentence. The whispers weren't subtle anymore. One morning, I overheard him laughing near the printers with another manager. "Some people can't handle a little pressure without turning into drama queens," he said loud enough for the entire floor to hear. My stomach twisted, but I didn't say a word. I just opened the voice memo app on my phone and hit record. That became my new pattern. Silent vigilance. Every slight, every exclusion, every cutting remark disguised as concern went into my log. I didn't need revenge. I needed proof. Then something unexpected happened. Sarah came to me again, but this time she wasn't alone. Another coworker, Ravi, quietly joined us in the break room. "We're tired of watching him do this," Ravi said. "We'll back you up if HR asks for witnesses." Hearing that nearly broke me. Not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't alone. A week later, HR summoned all three of us separately for follow-up interviews. By then, my boss's charm had started to crack. His emails were frantic, defensive, full of excuses, miscommunications, context missing, team stress. He was trying to rewrite the narrative, but this time, people weren't buying it. Then came the message that made my pulse race. "We've escalated the investigation to upper management." He'd always acted untouchable, the golden manager with results that spoke for themselves. But watching him pace around the office, jaw clenched and smile fading, I could tell he knew it too. Something big was coming. Weeks passed in uneasy silence. My boss stopped making small talk altogether. He looked thinner, distracted, like a man waiting for an inevitable storm to hit. HR meetings became more frequent, always behind closed doors. And then one morning, his office door stayed shut. All day. By noon, everyone could feel it. Something was happening. The company-wide email hit our inboxes later that afternoon. "We'll be holding a brief all-hands meeting today to discuss some organizational updates." When the meeting started, our department head stood in front of the room, smiling that rehearsed corporate smile. My boss's chair was empty. He wasn't just late. He wasn't there. "Before we begin," the department head said, "I want to acknowledge the hard work of everyone here. As part of our ongoing review process, some leadership changes are being made to ensure we uphold our company values." A low murmur rippled through the room. I watched faces glance toward that empty chair. My pulse hammered in my ears. After the meeting, I checked my inbox and froze. There it was, an official HR message. "After thorough review, your concerns have been validated. Corrective action has been implemented and we appreciate your courage in coming forward." No details, of course. HR never gives details. But when I saw Sarah later in the break room, she gave me that knowing look. "It's official," she whispered. "He's been reprimanded and pulled from the promotion list. They're bringing in an interim manager until they restructure his position." I didn't know whether to smile or cry. The man who once told me to be a man had just lost everything he'd been clawing toward. Not because I destroyed him, but because he destroyed himself. The air in the office felt lighter. People were talking again, laughing. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost. A few days after the announcement, my boss finally showed his face again. But he wasn't the same man. The confident stride was gone, replaced with hesitant steps and forced smiles. His eyes, once sharp and judgmental, now looked tired, uncertain. People greeted him with polite nods, not respect. You could almost feel the shift in the air. The fear he once commanded had vanished. Late that afternoon, I got an email from him. "Can we talk privately?" Just a quick chat. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to give him another second of my time. But another part, the part that had endured months of humiliation, wanted closure. So I agreed. He closed the conference room door softly behind us and sat down, avoiding eye contact. "I just wanted to clear the air," he started, voice low and uneven. "Things got out of hand. I didn't mean to make things personal. I said nothing, just watched him squirm in the silence he used to weaponize against others." He continued, "You have to understand, there's a lot of pressure in management. Sometimes I cut him off gently. "No, you don't get to justify it." He blinked, startled. "You told me to be a man when I lost my father," I said, my tone calm but unwavering. "So I did. I stood up for myself. I took control of my life. I didn't crumble. I didn't hide. I did exactly what you told me to." The room went dead quiet. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Eventually, he just nodded, small, defeated, and stood to leave. As he walked out, I realized something simple but powerful. I didn't need him to respect me. He already feared what I'd become, a man who refused to stay silent. In the weeks that followed, the office finally began to feel peaceful. The tension that once lingered in every corner was gone, replaced by an easy calm. My boss, former boss, became a ghost in the building. His name stopped showing up in emails, and eventually, I heard he'd been transferred to another department. The phrasing was diplomatic, but everyone knew it was code for demotion. As for me, I started breathing again. I took time off, not because I was forced to, but because I wanted to. I spent a few days with my mom, fixing the old porch my dad used to sit on every evening. I could almost hear his laugh echoing through the yard, that deep, reassuring sound that used to make everything feel okay. For the first time since he passed, I didn't cry out of pain. I cried out of gratitude. One night I sat alone on that same porch, staring at the stars, thinking about everything I'd been through. The grief, the humiliation, the fight for dignity, it had all changed me. My father once told me that strength wasn't about holding everything in. It was about knowing when to stand tall and when to let yourself feel. I finally understood what he meant. Back at work, people began to treat me differently, not out of pity, but out of respect. Sarah smiled one morning and said, "You know, the way you handled all this, it made the rest of us braver." 3 months later, HR called me in again. Only this time, it wasn't about an investigation. It was about an opportunity, a promotion. As I signed the new contract, I glanced at the empty desk that once belonged to him. It felt poetic. He told me to be a man. I did, just not the kind he'd ever understand.